Frisco Bay. 'Cause I've had nothing to live for, and look like nothing's gonna come my way. So I'm just gonna sit on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time.
Good morning, everybody. While you enjoy these peaceful tunes and we wait for the last few to join, there will be a few poll questions that'll pop up on your screen. So if you want to take a chance to submit your poll entry here, we just want it to be as collaborative as possible, and we'll read out the results at the end of the panel.
Watching the tide roll away. Ooh, I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time.
We're just going to give it one more minute and we'll kick it off.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, and then I'll watch them roll away again.
As everyone joins, in case you missed it, we're popping up a poll that you'll see on your screen. Just an opportunity to be a little more collaborative, and we'll reveal the results of that poll at the end.
I left my home in Georgia, headed for the Frisco Bay. I've had nothing to live for, and look like nothing's gonna come my way. So
let's go ahead and get started then. All right, well, we want to just thank everybody for joining us, and I'll be your host today. I'm Kim Corley, NYSHEC's VP of Sales, and we at NYSHEC just love to assemble thought leaders and tackle industry challenges and just work on promising solutions to those challenges. So today's challenge that we'll be tackling is balancing available contractual capacity and commitments with ever-changing demand. And we're excited that joining our panel today is Julius Tan, and he is Director of Logistics at carparts.com. Julius has a great deal of experience on both the carrier and the shipper side, and he's held various leadership roles with companies like HP, Gap, and APL. And in almost 3 years at carparts.com, Julius has put some solid infrastructure into place to ensure that he and his team are maximizing the performance of their ocean contracts. And if you aren't super familiar with carparts.com, they're an e-commerce provider of aftermarket auto parts, including collision parts, engine parts, performance parts, and accessories. In business for over 25 years, the company is focused on delivering a seamless factory-to-consumer online shopping experience. Carparts.com is headquartered in Torrance, California. Also joining us today on the panel, we have our very own Jeff Irvin, and he heads up our enterprise account team for NYSHEC. And Jeff has a great deal of insight when it comes to best practices with some of the largest shippers in the world, not only through his current role in interacting with our shipper members, but also through his decades in transport and supply chain management with Walmart. So we've compiled a list of questions for these two gentlemen, and we'll save plenty of time for your questions and deeper discussion toward the end. And if something has resonated with you, you'll have an opportunity at the end to just, we'll provide a way for you to connect with us, and we'll be able to answer your questions or help you any way we can. And as the last item of housekeeping, we just wanted to say while the panel's in progress, feel free to type any questions that you have into the chat box and we'll make sure that we get to them at the end. Okay, well, without further ado, let's get started. So the first question for Julius is, what does your current allocation management process look like today?
All right, thank you, Kim. So happy to be here today. So in terms of allocation, of course, we got to start from when we sign the contract at that point. So we do car parts, we do contract with several direct ocean carriers. We also have a certain segment of NVOs in our portfolio. So, at the start of the contract, typically for the Trans-Pacific trade, it is around May, right? So around about the time when we put to bed all our contracts, we set up the allocation. So, at a starting point, it's quite straightforward. It's a matrix. It's an Excel-based matrix. And, I think everyone in the audience will understand it's origin, destination, port pairs, carriers, and we kind of nominate, for each lane. For example, carrier A is going to get 50% of this lane. Carrier B is going to get 20%. So it starts off as a very basic Excel matrix. And then from there, we share it with our booking agent. So I want to say too that at Car Parts, we have great partners in the 3PL space. My booking agent also happens to be my customs broker. We'll come back to this point because it's quite critical to how we measure our performance. But at the starting point, it goes out as an Excel matrix, and then the people at the origin, my booking agent, they execute on the ground.
Yeah, and we hear that a lot, that it's many shippers. I think the stat was 73% of shippers are using spreadsheets to manage. That's great. And with any retail business, fluctuating demand and disruptions are expected. How do you forecast your needs to the carriers, and how far in advance do you forecast?
Right. So, as part of our overall ocean management process, we go about a year out, right? So again, very typical of the TP trade, Trans-Pacific trade. It's a 1-year contract that starts roughly from May. I know for different shippers, it may be a different time frame, but generally, from May. So we go out, we forecast when we do RFQs, it goes about 12 months out. So it starts from that time frame. And then, of course, we adjust accordingly on a quarterly basis, sometimes even on a monthly basis. As we all know, in the last 2 years, supply chain has been so disrupted. And, we're in a situation where we're constantly reviewing our entire network, including performance, allocations, and so on. So it starts from 12 months, goes down to a quarterly basis, and right now even as regularly as monthly reviews.
Hey, Julius, just wanted to follow up on that. Does carparts.com have like a fluctuating seasonal profile, or do you have more flat demand across the year? And then if it's fluctuating, how do you communicate those fluctuations to your carriers?
That's a great question, Jeff. Different retailers have different patterns. So I'm very privileged to have worked in apparel retail, in tech, and now in the aftermarket auto parts business. Now, all our importers, but the patterns are different. So I'm also happy to say that in car parts, we are more steady in our volumes, quite different from retailers, right? Apparel retailers, for instance, because as we all know, a lot of retailers are driven by the holiday season, like Black Friday and Christmas, and the buildup in the inventory starts about Q3. That's very typical of the retail industry. For car parts, because we're more of a replenishment business, and as you can understand, collision parts, auto parts, they're needed year round, and the car models, they don't change that regularly, so it's less seasonal in that sense. So for us, it's more even. And if there was any seasonality, actually car parts, we are heavier on Q1. Winter time, drivers require more support, right? If you think about it. So in the aftermarkets business, actually, we're somewhat counter-cyclical to the retailers, but overall, we're very even in our volumes year round.
Yeah, and if I could just follow up on one more question there, like, how do you, in my experience, if you want something to happen, it happens at origin. And so how do you get this forecast to where at origin, your booking agent and your carriers understand what that forecast is, what that demand needed will be?
Another great question, Jeff. So, it goes to some philosophies and practices. I want to bring up what I call the 3 pillars of operational excellence. It goes into, how we execute. 3 pillars of excellence. Number 1 would be the people, right? Number 1, people. And when I say people, I also mean our partners, our merchandisers. I also mean the organizational structure, because it's how you set up the people aspect. I'll go into more detail as we continue this dialogue. So number 1 is people. Number 2 is the processes. Like, what are the processes? And we'll get into that too. From headquarters, and how do we partner? How do we deliver the message? And what are the processes of getting feedback, right? For the ground, when things are happening, when disruptions are happening, how do we course correct? How do we respond to situations? So number 2 is the processes. Number 3 would be the tools. So, we have all these massive amounts of cargo going on. Car Parts is a medium-sized shipper. We move about 100 containers a week, compared to major retailers who are moving thousands per week. So level of complexity. So to handle the level of complexity, we need not just the processes and the people, and then you need the tools. I think, as the NICHEX team will bring up that particular capability to the fore. But, number 3 would be the tools, i.e. the systems and the technology.
Good.
So, yeah, I think we can go more into that as we continue on.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great. I love that, the 3 pillars. And when you mentioned just all of the people and the partners that you have in the mix, how does your team process that influx of data that's coming in from multiple parties?
Right. So with Car Parts, and I want to bring the point that I mentioned earlier, is because our booking agent also happens to be our customs broker. So, it's great that we have an Excel spreadsheet and a matrix and a nomination allocation instructions, but how do we know, right, that it's happening to plan? How do we know that the booking agent is not having difficulties, especially in the last 2 years? So the great thing about our setup is our booking agent is also our customs broker. So we have a very good end-to-end view. The moment a booking is made, we have that. And we also have access. We kind of piggyback on our 3PL system. I won't mention the system they use, but it's very common in the industry. A lot of freight forwarders use such systems, and they give us a level of view to our shipments. So actually, for Car Parts, thanks to our partner again, we have a pretty good track and tracing system. Okay, so we can access the system, or we can download. There's many ways to share the information, but essentially we are able to get the booking information almost real time. What's booked today in Asia, overnight, I already know it, I see it. Again, it's through the access from our 3PL system. So the visibility aspect, that's super critical. I think, again, that's gonna, is also going to dovetail into what NICHEX is going to offer to your members, the track and trace system. So by having a very, very robust track and trace system, so when a booking is made, when a booking is accepted, whether it's gated in, so every milestone in the supply chain, we have a pretty good level of visibility. I think we can talk about data integrity, but that comes under some of the difficulties. But overall, when things are working well in the Car Parts, it goes beyond the spreadsheet. It definitely goes beyond the spreadsheet. Systems access, the track and trace, the data integrity behind that. So now, assuming that we have a good track and trace system, I know which container is moving at any time. I know the location of my container at any moment in time. Those milestones are accurate. So once we have that, we can then we can collate the information. So the other key piece about the tools and the systems and the technology and the process is for Car Parts. We take all this information, right? We have massive amounts of data. We know, the problem about data overload, right? Sometimes it's too much data, but how we organize it is we take all the information, the track and trace system from various sources, and then we host it on a data warehouse. Some call it data warehouse, a data pool, a data lake. But essentially, we take all the information. It may be from different sources and different formats, whether it's CSV, fact file, Excel. The ability to synthesize. So we have this data lake, and on top of the data lake, then we apply visual analytics, right? So again, it goes beyond, and as we advance more, as we scale, we need those kind of tools. So at the end of it, you need KPIs, and how we draw our KPIs is we go to that data lake, we apply, visual analytics capabilities, and then we are able to see it like on a weekly basis. So I hope that gives a good idea.
Yeah. So in your data warehouse, this information is dynamic. It's live. I mean, that's huge. And then another important point that you made just now, it's the data is near real time. So has that really helped you, just having that live, collaborative, and near real-time data? Has that helped you just empower your decision making to make the best decision at all times?
Absolutely. So I'm very happy and I'm very lucky, right, in my position that we're able to get the data almost real time, like I said. I think the other characteristic I do want to share about CarPass is because we move most of our great majority of our ocean cargo in 40-foot high cube containers, so FCL full containers, right? We move very little LCL. We do not transload, so that we actually remove some of the complexity. In other different companies, I've managed with transloading and so on, right? The complexities are around that. So coming back to the story about the data that we have, so almost real time. That's really great. I think the other point that we can probably morph into, like, what are some of the issues and challenges that we face when we are managing our data. So let's say we get to a point now. So CarPass, we're at the point where we have the data, it's almost real time, good level of data integrity. But I think, one of the issues, I'm sure many shippers experience that, is due to the complexity and the disruptions that go on, we don't get like 100% accuracy of, all our data. So that's the point about data integrity. I think apart from the disruptions and the seasonal nature of businesses, I think a lot of shippers would face the issue of data integrity. And by that, I mean the timeliness of the data and the accuracy, right? So I have been in the previous positions before where I had a team of several people just scrubbing and cleaning up data to make it accurate and usable for us. So I think data integrity, i.e. timeliness and accuracy, that is so important, and yet it's sometimes elusive.
And Julius, one thought that you brought to mind there is, as you're looking at the data, getting the data, and then ultimately we know that things change because supply chain schedules, shippers, factories, all of these are moving targets. So how do you capture exceptions in the process that happen so that you understand, was this a factory issue? Was this a schedule change? And then the second part of the question, if you do see a schedule change, how do you react to that?
Well, that's another set of great questions, Jeff. So when things don't go according to plan, how do we even know, right? And that's where the close to real time, the overnight. Sometimes it's as simple as an email, because we set up our allocations, and like a lot of shippers, we have what's known as ship cancel date or closing date, various terminologies, but essentially it defines the time at which the factory needs to ship a certain PO, right? So that's the basic idea. So we have all these POs, and we're in great collaboration with our merchandisers. We have an entire list of all our POs, which are the factories. How do we know even that our factories are shipping on time? Are they late? So there's measurements around that, so again, assuming that we have a way to measure whether the factories are on time, and then are they booking on time with our booking agent? And then on the booking agent side, Are they accepting the bookings? Are they making bookings with the right ocean carrier? Are they securing the space as expected? So how do we know when things are not going right? It could be a simple overnight email. So from my major origins, I get actually daily reports. Again, to be honest, a lot of it's on Excel spreadsheets. And for car parts, again, our business is not that overwhelming that we can't manage it on an email. So I get overnight reports from my origin. So I have a good pulse of what's going on the ground. So it's emails, it's some kind of spreadsheet that tells me whether things are going fine or they're going off the rails. And if they're going off the rails, I know it pretty much overnight when I get the alerts. And behind that, right, there's all these metrics and KPIs going on. We run our KPIs weekly. KPIs, basic elements, like on-time shipment, volume, which carrier. We are able to do it on a weekly level. If in a crunch, I could run a quick number of what happened yesterday, but typically for our business, we do it on a weekly KPI review. So there's all these feelers. We have all these feelers out there, right? From the booking agent to how the factory is performing to getting space, and how does that information flow back to me? It can be phone calls, emails, spreadsheets, and then we look at our systems. We kind of put the picture together, right, from different sources. So let's say once we know something's not going right, I think then the next point is how do we course correct? I'm very involved in the day-to-day as well, so I do monitor what's going on, especially this disrupted supply chain right now demands a lot of attention. So fingers on the pulse through various sources, KPIs to know whether we're on track, and if we are not on track, I can quickly go back overnight again to my booking agent to say, okay, we got to do this, we got to do that. Sometimes we have to escalate, right, to the shipping partner, the ocean carriers. So through a series of escalations, we try to course correct, we try to remedy a situation, before it really goes out of hand. So I hope that gives you a good picture, Jack.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And you mentioned something really key there, that you have a way to receive alerts. Is this a systematic alert from that you've built, or is this something that's coming from your 3PL?
Another great question. So right now, it's still somewhat manual because, car parts, we've been on a transformation journey and we're scaling. We doubled our business in the last 3 years, right? So in 2019, we were half of the current size. So we've been scaling. And where we are in the journey is some of the processes are semi-manual, right? It's a mix of spreadsheets and emails and systems and track and trace capability and a data lake that I spoke about. But the alerts that we get right now are more manual. So that means someone calls me or emails me to say, here we have this situation, and we can have a quick huddle. I do make calls to Asia, on my nights to solve some issues on the ground. But a lot of it's manual, traditional way, phone calls. But I do want to say that car parts, we are on the journey towards even more automation. ERPs. I know a lot of shippers have ERPs. We're in the process of implementing ERP. Ultimately, the ERP is going to integrate with everything else, including a future logistics system. So the vision is we would like to have a more automated set of alerts, system driven. Right now, to be real honest, we're not there yet.
Julius, if I could follow up on that point, is as you have multiple contracts with carriers and NVOs that you're managing, and you've got your booking agent following your rules, how do you see, or how do you break ties, as you're trying to determine if you've got some conflicting situations? I know when I was managing allocation at Walmart, we had the golden rule. And the golden rule was book shipments to arrive within plus or minus 3 days of the must arrive at port date. And then we got these dedicated our committed contracts that we had to develop the platinum rule. And the platinum rule was fill these contracts first. So how do you communicate that to your booking agent so that they understand what your priorities are real time as they're booking?
Great. So yeah, if I understand your question, yeah, it's about how do we meet our MQC commitments? That's one way, while also at the same time ensuring that we are meeting in-store dates.
Exactly.
So I understand that. So obviously, my own approach is ultimately what's best for the customer, right? So if you like, our North Star is what's best for our customer. So for me, among the rules you mentioned, what's best for the customer means, right time, right part, right auto part at the right place, right? So the on-time shipping, actually on-time to store, on-time availability for the customer, that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate because, again, being in a retail business and I was in apparel. So if we miss the season, it's gone, right? It's a perishable product in that sense. So to me, okay, we have to get the product in, at the right time, you don't want to go out of stock and so on. That's one. But of course, the balancing of the MQCs and, sometimes there's cost because a lot of our allocation decisions are made pretty heavily weighted towards cost, right? Because, landed costs and you want to get it in as competitive as possible. I will admit, cost is a big factor in how we nominate. So it's always a balance. A lot of it has to do with also the dialogue. If we come across a situation where there's a conflict, Jeff, like you mentioned, I need to be on time, but if I use such and such a carrier, I'm going to fulfill MQC, but I'm going to be late. Well, I think that's where we need to talk to our merchandisers to see if there's any leeway. So I think a lot of it's the collaboration and the dialogue. I don't think it's a quick, a single linear decision. There's a lot of puts and takes behind that. So, but then ultimately, like I said, a customer comes first. We need to meet the customer's needs, meet and exceed. And then after that, the collaboration that goes on, trying to find solutions that can meet all the requirements, right? Of course, the happy place is to find a solution that meets all the goals that we just mentioned.
Thank you.
Yeah, that led me to your third pillar here on tools. And obviously you've done some really great things. You're working on your ERP, you've built the data warehouse, it's dynamic, it's near real time, the alerts and the KPIs. What are some of the characteristics of a tool that what would it have to be or have in order for you to consider it for allocation management?
It's great, yeah. So processes and tools. So what are some of the key elements I'm looking for, right? Key notes of success. Mm-hmm. So the real-time nature of it, and I think what supports that would be a very, very robust track and trace. We're still trying to improve our track and trace system. While we have a pretty good level of visibility now with our 3PL, sometimes because the data is not always streamlined. Different ocean carriers, terminology is different. How they define a gate in or loading is different, and so on, things like that. So sometimes it's complex because there's no set, ISO. You don't always have ISO standards around the data. So the data part is so important, and there's so many parts to data, right? But to me, the timeliness and accuracy that I mentioned, the data, what makes data integrity great or successful is if it is timely and it's accurate. And by accurate, I mean, the milestones are well defined. It's giving me the correct date, right, of when a vessel arrives, when it discharges, when my container gates out. I think all of us who've dealt with data, we've always found exceptions, so the system that I need, in order to be reliable, it has those elements of data integrity. And then, you can have the other things that I'm looking for could be ease of use. Sometimes our systems are very, very complex and requires, a lot of engineers. I'm not saying that's true of car parts. And actually in car parts, It's a very flat organization. Collaboration is great, but I think for complex organizations, the risk is the tools becomes very difficult to use. Because by the nature of the tools and the technology behind it. That's why it's kind of like sometimes I wonder, there's a reliance on Excel because Excel is more accessible to everyone, whereas certain tools may be more difficult to use. Maybe you've got to be somewhat of an engineer to be able to take full advantage of systems. So I think what I'm looking for would be a tool on top of data integrity and the timeliness aspect and ease of use. Yeah, I think those are what I'm looking for.
That's great. And what kind of results, since you have deployed all the different tools that you have, and what sort of results have you seen before and after from deploying these different resources?
Great, great question again. So I've been with CarParts for almost 3 years now, so I've seen the journey. The results we're getting now is the ability to actually almost real time, overnight, what's booked at origin, any issues at origin. We're at the point now where we know about exceptions and issues practically overnight, right? So it's really helped us in very, very appropriate, time appropriate decision making. So that's helped us a lot. And again, that the concept of collecting our data and making it usable, right, in that data lake that I spoke about. And then we placed an app. I will name some names in terms of applications. I think everyone understands and knows them well. Visual analytics, whether it's a Tableau, Power BI, those kind of tools, right? It's great that we have data and then it's good integrity and it's accurate, but how do we render it to a level that we can use it for decision making, right? Data is data, but how do we make it usable? So we put those visual analytics apps on it. So where we are today is we do weekly KPIs and we can run different cuts, right? We can look at origin. So once you have the data, you can slice and dice it in many ways. And with visual analytics, it's a great tool. So as an example, if I want to on a weekly basis, I know my MQC performance with every single carrier. Carrier A, I'm at 80% fill rate. Carrier C, D, and E, I'm only at 20% fill rate, right, in terms of MQC. So the fingers on the pulse and then the tools behind that. So for CarParts, where we are, 3 years on this journey now of transformation, we're at the point where we have a very, very good level of a feel. We have a good level of feel of what's going on the ground, and we have the data to support us to make good decisions. And once we make the decision, it's an easy communication out, to our partners. So we're in a very good place today.
It sounds like it, Julius. It's always feel like I'm sitting at the feet of the professor when I'm with Julius.
Still a lot to do, still a lot to learn.
No, it's like being in a master class.
Thank you.
The last question that I had, unless Jeff wanted to add anything before we move into our audience Q&A, is just for folks that are sitting here today, they're working with spreadsheets. They haven't really put into action a lot of the things that you have in the initiatives and the KPIs. How would you guide them, or what's the single most important piece of advice that you would give them to get started to try and think this through?
Yeah, it really depends on the journey that different parties are on. I think we have a very broad range of participants. So some come from huge complex companies, some come from NVOs, logistics providers, and yet there may be other smaller shippers who are just starting out, importing small volumes. To me, the basics remain. So the basics means, again, I go back to my pillars of operational excellence. Those are like my guiding goals, right? We got to get the right people, and it's not just talent. Number one, of course, talent. We in my team, we do have a very strong data analytics team, right? 1 or 2 persons. So the talent behind that, and then the org structure, organizational structure, whether it's how we set up, how do we manage destination, and then you need a way to manage the origin because it's end to end, right? And what I found very productive from my various companies' experiences, it's always great to have eyes and ears on the ground. You know, ideally, it's our own employees. You know, in one of my previous companies, we had sizable sourcing office in Hong Kong. But, you know, in the absence of your own people on the ground, 3PL, a booking agent is the next best option. So the people, the organizational structure, right? And then you go back to, again, the basics, processes. What kind of process? How do we communicate our allocations, instructions out? And what are the processes for getting feedback, to be able to communicate exceptions? What are the processes for collecting the data? You know, I think we need to think through those elements. And then finally, of course, right, the tools. So once you're getting to the point where now you have data points, you have feedback, you have information, you know, to prevent data overload or, you know, burnout from over data, the tools, right? So picking the right tools, I think technology nowadays, we're a lot better now, you know, than let's say several years ago. At a very simple level, just the ability to share documents like, you know, Google Docs, Teams, file sharing, OneDrive. I think, you know, everyone's very familiar. So versions of truth, you know, that we didn't touch on that. Sometimes things go haywire because there's many different spreadsheets floating around. So how do you manage that for data integrity? I think one of the simple ways is just document sharing, you know, the version control. So, you know, people, processes, and then to have the right tools that sit on top of everything and gets you what you want, right? And then, you know, the visual analytics that's going to help us, you know, get the lay of the land, you know, very quickly.
I'm so glad we're recording this because those are some really great nuggets that I'm sure many of the folks watching are going to want to refer back to. And now we're going to transition into our audience Q&A and let all of the audience ask their questions. So if you have not already typed your questions into the chat box, we're going to give you just 1 minute to do so. And as everyone gets those questions in, if you're listening to this and you're going, I'm feeling very discouraged, overwhelmed, maybe the ship that you're running isn't quite as tight as Julius is. And if so, we'd love to speak with you because the challenge that we've been discussing today is one that NYSHEX has been working to solve alongside of several of our shipper members. You may already be familiar with our role in monitoring performance for and resolving the exceptions that arise in NYSHEX two-way committed contracts. But what you may not know is that NYSHEX technology can support any contract type or carrier. With the newest allocation management module on the NYSHEX app, you can view your carrier and MVO contracts and allocations all in one dashboard. We connect with all your logistics providers to provide near real-time visibility into both parties' adherence to contractual allocation. You can drill down into the performance of every contract in your portfolio and identify areas where your contractual space is at risk. So with that, the result will be the latest and most reliable data to empower your decision-making and make sure that you utilize every last container of your allocation. So for those of you who are interested in hearing more, you will see a nice little pop-up there that will just let us know that you'd like to be contacted. So, but right before we ask the first question from the audience, we want to reveal the poll results, the information that you guys gave us at the beginning. So Max, if you'll pop those up here.
Sure thing, 1 moment.
This is like waiting for a gift.
Yes.
Can't wait to see the results.
I know. I think it'll be very interesting. If we want, we can start with.
Let's maybe go into the first questions, yeah, and then
Yeah.
we'll bring the poll results in shortly.
Okay, perfect.
Just like being told I have to wait to open the present.
That's right. Suspense, it's killing us. Okay, so the first question was, how do you forecast to better support your booking agent? Do you or your team monitor the cargo ready date and whether there are adjustments? how can you do that at scale?
Okay, so I guess question for me. So Xander Cannon, so thank you for your question. No, so how do we forecast to support the booking agent? So with I think some of the best practices has to do with knowing what our POs are. I think a lot of companies, sometimes large companies, there's so many disparate departments that the logistics department, doesn't have a full picture of what POs are being placed. So I think one of the important things, for internal collaboration is somebody, whether it's an ERP system or through some other means, we need to have the entire list of POs. So in the case of car parts, I know very well the list of POs. So, car parts, like I said, we are a medium-sized company. We ship about 5,000 containers a year. That equates to 5,000 POs, right? So not a lot, very manageable. But for large companies that ship, a million POs a year, complexity, right? So I think it comes from having a good visibility to all my POs that I have, and every PO has a shipping date. You can call it ship cancel date, ready to ship, must ship date, but essentially that's the date that the factory has to ship. So now we have a list of POs. We know that the factories have to ship on such and such a day. I actually share that list with my booking agent. So, open communication and partnership, right? My booking agent knows the entire list of my POs. Let's say, coming in the next 30 days, next 60 days. So we know every single PO that is supposed to ship, in the next 30 or 60 days. Every single PO, we know it. We know the shipping date. We know when it has to hit certain milestones, right? So monitoring the cargo ready date is working with my shipping agent to make sure that we're booking on time, we're targeting the correct vessel, right? And if everything goes right, no problem. And then you just work on the exceptions. So even at scale, Xander, even at scale, essentially we need to know our POs, the shipping dates, and then we need to share that and with our partners on the ground, the people out in the origin points, right? Very critical. I need to make sure that they are fully equipped. Okay, so I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and if I could jump in on that, Julius, at my time at Walmart, the process was very similar to what you described as far as doing a 90-day, a 60-day, and a 45-day forecast. But then when we got into what we called the take or pay arrangements, or today we might call them the two-way committed contracts, we really had to adjust the way we forecasted and brought in a team of Walmart associates from Origin, as well as our 3PL partner and ocean carriers. And we all met together to talk about how are we going to change that forecasting process. And what we ended up with was this rolling 8-week forecast. And the carrier partners told us, if this is going to be valuable, we've got to get it down to the vessel and voyage level. And so that really became the discussion point for our Origin team every week, was to sit down with the 3PL, the booking agent, and the carriers and look at that 8-week forecast. And so they had that view 8 weeks out at the vessel level, the amount of capacity that we were asking for on those vessels. And then 3 weeks prior to departure, we would lock that in and say, okay, we're not going to make any more changes. But at the same point, that 3 weeks out, we expected the carrier to commit to whatever we had been talking about for the last 5 weeks. So to bring it back to the question, how did we help the booking agent? We did this 8-week rolling forecast. We got down to the vessel level and allowed the booking agent to talk to the carrier about specific vessels and voyages that we were asking for space on.
That's great. And we will definitely come back to the next few questions that we had, but we had our poll pop up here. So gonna open that gift for you now, Jeff. The first question was, how do you manage your allocation processes for all your contracts today? And the audience has responded with half of the group using a homegrown Excel tool. And it looks like if we combine a couple of these, the next biggest vote was, well, the 3PL or the carrier NVOCC platforms. So getting data from multiple sources, perhaps, and using Excel. And then the second question was, what are the biggest challenges you face today when using your current setup? And it looks like there was a tie between lack of visibility into our performance and data accuracy version control, which are definitely things you highlighted as well, Julius. The third question was, how long does it take your team each week to put together reports and draw insights? 44% said 3 to 6 hours, followed by 1 to 3 hours. So, and 9% 1 to 3 days. So that's a lot of time being spent there. So thanks to everybody for sharing your candid feedback with us there on those questions. And if we go back into our questions, we had a question from Victor here. How often do you consult the visibility information? Do you only look at the information once you know things are not going according to plan? And if so, then wouldn't the best way to consume visibility data be via notifications, warnings, and assume everything else is going well?
Okay, that's a great question, Victor Rosales. How do we consult the visibility information? I'd say all the time, right? Because, you know, systems are 24/7, they're always available. So as far as car parts and my team, we are constantly looking whether things are going well or not well, right? I mean, you need to see everything, full visibility. So how often do I consult it? All the time, you know, daily, on a daily basis. We know what's going well, you know, the percentage, just a quick look, again, with whether it's visual analytics or some other way, a quick health of the situation, right? Health of our network. What's going well, we know. And then what's not going well, you know, we identify them through our daily reviews, and then we jump in when necessary. But I will say, you know, I have great partners, and when things are not going right, I get multiple pings, right? Whether it's text messages, it's emails, you know, if it's real urgent, phone calls, right? So there's many ways to get that visibility, but it's all the time. You know, we don't wait till something goes wrong, or we don't wait for a weekly review, right? It's every single minute, actually. Ideally, every single minute, we need to know what's going on with our network. And, you know, notifications, yes, you know, more automation, and if we can set up some system, you know, again, there's a lot of better and better systems. You know, at the TPM, there were a lot of technology companies, and that was what I noticed very different this year at the TPM, which, you know, the introduction of technology, track and trace, right? I think there is a convergence of all this effort, so towards supply chain visibility and, you know, systems management. And I'm pretty sure there are capabilities out there for automated notifications of exceptions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have a question here from Marco. Dear Mr. Julius, do you prefer to use forwarding agencies for handling your bookings, or do you work directly with carriers? Also, what is the approximate ratio of prepaid versus collect shipments? Okay,
so Marco, different questions there. First one, you know, I guess Marco's questions, issue of whether it's direct carrier contract versus forwarder NVOs. So car parts, we are a BCO, right? We are a beneficial cargo owner. So we do contract directly with ocean carriers. And, you know, some of my answers here would be more personal in terms of my experience, and, you know, my own experience may not translate to other participants, but, you know, I have certain views. So with assuming that a shipper has sufficient volumes to sign a meaningful contract, right? When I say meaningful, it means, you know, you get the relevant support and attention rather than a 1-800 number, right? If you have sufficient volumes, generally I prefer to weigh more towards direct ocean carriers. And the reason is, you know, the vessel operators, right? They control the space, pretty much they control the space, they control the pricing. So I negotiate direct pricing, direct space with the direct carriers, right? So that's why my leaning is more towards direct carriers. now, and then the relationships definitely count, right? We talk about partnerships and collaboration. It's a big deal, having the right partners and having the right environment for collaboration. But assuming again, all of the relationships are great. Direct carriers. Now, I will also say that we're not 100% direct carriers because there's also, right? There's also a place for freight forwarders. In the last 2 years, I think shippers, we've learned so much, right? We've experienced, situations that maybe once, hopefully it's no more than once in a lifetime kind of situations in the last 2 years. So it's always, for me, despite the fact that I just mentioned that, I lean towards direct carriers, at the same time, there is a place for NVOs because, the market changes, right? And I will also call out that it was because of our NVO partners that we managed to ship our products during the pandemic, so we had to supplement like all shippers, with direct carriers, again, there's a shortage of space. We had to go out to the open market. Like a lot of shippers, we had to do that too. And then having those freight forwarder partners, right? That saved us a lot of pain too. The price is the price. There is a market price. There's a demand and supply dynamic in the market. We understand that. Sometimes we have to accept the price that is available in the market. All right, if that's the case. But the important thing, in the last 2 years was space, right? And then with a combination of direct carrier and the relationships and so on, plus supplementing with NVOs, right? I think maybe Marco might have a question like, oh, what's the percentage of direct carrier versus NVO profile? I think my answer to that is it really depends on your company and your cargo profile. For car parts, because we are more even in our volumes throughout the year, we can actually commit a high level of MQC to our ocean carriers, divided by 52 weeks, right? So generally, I would allocate more to direct carriers, just again, the nature of the business, and it may not apply to other shippers. And then I do supplement with NVOs, right? So both are relevant.
Yeah, that was a question that we always struggled with, what percentage should be with the NVOs. And it just like you said, it really depends on the business and, what volume is steady 52 weeks. And then where do you need to supplement where you may have a one-off, right, and you don't have that one-off lane in a contract. And so it's a really good question. And I think it really does depend on the business itself and the nature of what you're shipping.
Right. I think, Marco had a second question there about the ratio of prepaid versus collect shipments. I think I know the direction of Marco's question. To me, my answer to that is control, right, of my cargo, right? So because for ease of control and ensuring that we are shipping on time, we are meeting customers' needs, my preference is usually for collect, FOB arrangements, because then, I nominate the ocean carrier, I negotiate the pricing, I can control my landed costs, right? So I have a leaning towards collect shipments, but there may be cases where, vendors, because of scale and so on, there are reasons where certain vendors, that they have the power of scale, they would recommend prepaid or, DDP terms, right? DDP terms, we have a very, very small amount of cargo, but I'd say, the great majority of my cargo is collect or FOB basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, another great question. And I think it does depend. One of the phrases I like to use is not every import is a good import. And the reason for that goes back to what's the profile of the item that you're importing. So if this is something that's a hot trend and the trend could crash at any moment, that might not be a good import because you are taking possession of that much further up in the supply chain. And so if the business is going to need to react quickly to that, that's one that I would think twice about and really do the analysis to determine if that item makes sense for an import or whether I would rather buy that item domestically.
That's a good call out. Mohammed asks if an ERP shared with agents and customers would be more efficient.
My straight answer to that is yes, right? So car parts ourselves, we're on our ERP journey, but in a fully deployed system or close to full deployment, I think the ERP can be used by all our business partners. So that's the vision, right? So yes, to share the ERP or version, right? A version of the ERP with agents, customers, and our factories. I know a lot of shippers, you are integrated with the factories too. So conceivably, right, from order placement to production visibility, right? So ERP promises a lot, and I think that's a great capability. In its fully deployed form, we're going to get a lot of visibility even from the moment we place POs, and we can track the production schedule and how the factory is doing. So the answer is yes. Agents, customers, factories, all stakeholders, right? In a version that resonates with those parties.
Yeah, and if I could tag on to that, my question would be, what are you solving for? And so I agree that the ERP is critical to that, and we would share our purchase orders with the 3PLs and give them the rules to translate purchase orders into the capacity needed. But then what? And then that's the point that an allocation management system takes over and begins to translate that into the lanes, the weeks, the vessels, the voyages, and sets the table for collaboration with all the partners in the supply chain to make sure that you've got the capacity when you need it.
Yeah. So, at its highest level, I think the ERP will be able to integrate with, all the systems, including logistics systems, finance system, you name it, right? So what we're doing in our logistics field, the track and trace, ultimately can also feed and integrate with the ERP.
Building that total infrastructure for your supply chain. Yeah. And the last question we have here before we wrap up is, how long in advance are you placing your bookings to ocean carriers to secure the equipment and vessel space?
Okay, so anonymous. From the beginning, when we sign we do RFQs, we sign the contracts, right? And there has to be some kind of agreement, whether tacit or very overt agreement with the ocean carrier about allocations, right? So for us, so that's where I would start with the allocation and how do we manage the allocation and how do I ensure that I'm getting the space with our best ocean partners. Actually, at the start of the contract, we'll agree on a weekly allocation, right? So we're in an environment where it's MQC divided by 52, pretty much, right? With small variations. Of course, blank sailings can throw a monkey wrench, right? But generally, we go with an agreed allocation. So X TEUs per week with our best ocean carriers. So I know the capacity I have, and then we set up our allocation matrix. And then in terms of booking, right? So my booking agent should know, I'm communicating my space allocation with my booking agent. So typically they would place about 3 weeks out. I want to say you can't really place real, shipment bookings too far out because, a lot of ocean carriers, they don't open the vessel, right? I think those of us who are in operations, you'll understand what I'm saying. A lot of shipping lines, they do not open their vessels for booking until about 3 to 4 weeks out because, delays, congestion, they don't know when the vessel is going to arrive, Taiwan or China. So how can they open up the bookings? So the sweet spot for us, is around 2 to 3 weeks. We found that works for our shipping lines, works for us. Less than 2 weeks is tough because the factories are not ready. They need to load the cargo. They need to go collect the empty equipment. I'd say less than 2 weeks is a huge challenge. So 2 to 3 weeks is kind of a sweet spot.
Okay. Those were great questions. Well, and since our hour is coming to a perfect close here, we want to thank Julius and Jeff for taking the stage and helping us think through solutions for optimizing contract and allocation management. And thank you all for joining us and for the really engaging questions. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Great questions. Thank you, Kim, Jeff.
Thank you. Goodbye.